A man died believing his son knew he loved him. His son spent the next 30 years believing the exact opposite, and then, after the funeral, he found 3 sentences hidden inside an old ledger. 3 sentences that changed everything. Because sometimes the people who love us most never learn how to say it, and sometimes we don't understand what they've been saying until it's too late. This is the story of a father, a son, and 11 years of sacrifice hidden between rows of numbers. Before Daniel found those 3 sentences, he spent most of his life believing his father never cared. Not because Elias Bowen was cruel, not because he was absent, but because he belonged to a generation of men who believed love was something you did, not something you said, and that belief would cost both of them decades they could never get back. Elias Bowen was born in 1908 in Grover County, Kansas, the 3rd son of a farmer who taught him 2 things: the land does not negotiate, and silence is not weakness. By 19, he had hands that looked 60 years old. By 26, he had a wife named Ruth, 40 acres, and a pride so deep it had no bottom. He was not a cruel man. He was a precise one. He believed that what a man provided was what a man said. That flower on the table and shoes on a child's feet were a language unto themselves. He had never told his own father he loved him. He would not have understood why anyone felt the need to. Daniel arrived in 1941, the same year the drought began, and neither of them knew it yet. But that timing would shape the rest of their lives. The drought of 1941 took 80% of the harvest. The drought of 1942 took the rest. By the spring of 1943, Elias Bowen owed $4,000 to a neighboring landowner named Hector Grange. The debt carried interest, the kind that does not sleep. One night, after Ruth had put Daniel to bed, Elias sat alone at the kitchen table and made a decision. He would repay every cent, not because Hector Grange deserved it, but because the land was Daniel's inheritance, and no man would take it while Elias still had 2 working hands. He began waking at 4 every morning, fields before sunrise, home after dark, extra work clearing fence lines in winter. He sold the truck and walked. He stopped buying tobacco. He stopped buying anything that wasn't flour, salt, or seed. Daniel watched all of it, a small boy watching his father move through the house like weather, present, powerful, and beyond reach. "Dad, can we go to the fair this summer?" Daniel asked once. Elias looked at him the way a man looks at a beautiful thing he cannot afford. "Not this year," he said, and then he returned to the ledger. Years later, Daniel would discover that every sacrifice, every refusal, every exhausting day had been recorded there for a reason he couldn't yet understand. But at the time, all he heard was no. Daniel stopped asking. That became a habit. The years passed the way hard years do, not quickly, but heavily. Daniel turned 8, then 12, then 16. He worked beside his father and learned something no one ever taught him directly. Emotion was a distraction. Good men worked. Goodness was measured by exhaustion. But there was one evening Daniel would carry for the rest of his life. He was 14. He had won a regional arithmetic competition, the kind that earned a photograph in the county paper. His teacher, Miss Aldridge, shook his hand and smiled. "Your father must be proud." Daniel nodded, but privately he realized he had never actually considered what his father felt about him. That night, he placed the certificate on the dinner table between them. Elias looked at it. Then he said, "Eat before it's cold." And that was all. Daniel waited for a smile, a nod, anything. Nothing came. He picked up his fork. He did not cry. He was his father's son. He ate his dinner. And somewhere in the silence between them, something that might have become closeness became distance. And then, over the years, that distance became a wall so old neither of them could remember building it. At 17, Daniel left for Wichita. No argument. No dramatic goodbye. He told his father on a Monday. He was gone by Friday. Elias nodded. "Write your mother." Then he went out to check the fences. "What would you have done? Would you have stayed?" demanded the words. Or would you have done exactly what Daniel did? Carried the wound without a name and kept walking? Most of us do exactly what Daniel did. We stop asking. We leave, and then we spend years wondering. Elias Bowen made the final payment to Hector Grange on a Thursday in March of 1954. He was 46 years old. He shook Grange's hand, walked home, sat at the kitchen table, and put his face in his hands. Ruth asked what was wrong. "Nothing is wrong." That was what he said. What he meant was something very different. "I kept the land. I kept my promise. Daniel will never have to know how close we came." But like so many things in Elias Bowen's life, those words never left his mouth. By then, Daniel was living in Wichita with a wife named June and a son on the way. He had not returned to the farm in 4 years. His letters were short. His father's replies were shorter. Together, they had achieved a particular kind of loneliness. The loneliness of two people who love each other and no longer know how to say it. Elias died in 1971, quietly, in his sleep, the way he had lived, without spectacle, without fuss, without a word to spare. Daniel came home for the funeral. He sorted through the farmhouse alone. He almost left the tin box behind. It looked like it contained nothing but old accounts. He almost left it. Inside were ledgers, rows of numbers, payments, debts, seed purchases, fence repairs. 11 years of sacrifice carefully recorded line by line. Daniel turned one page, then another, and finally, at the very back, he found 3 handwritten sentences. He read them once, then again, then he sat down on the floor and wept in a way he had not wept since he was a boy, young enough to believe his father might take him to the fair. The words said, 11 years, 4 months, 12 days. Every dollar of it was for Daniel. I hope he never knew how close we came to losing it. That was all, and somehow, it was everything. Elias Bowen never rebuilt a relationship with his son. He built something else, 11 years of proof that Daniel mattered more than comfort, more than pride, more than rest. He just never showed Daniel the proof. There are people in our lives who love us through labor, through sacrifice, through showing up, through carrying burdens we never notice. And because their love doesn't look the way we expect, we sometimes mistake it for distance. Sometimes we're right, and sometimes we're simply reading the wrong language. Daniel kept the ledger. He framed the final page behind glass and hung it in his kitchen. Years later, his own son asked about it. That evening, Daniel sat down and told him everything. The drought, the debt, the fair he never attended, the certificate, the silence, the tin box he almost left behind. It was the longest conversation Daniel had ever had about anything that truly mattered, and he owed it to 3 sentences written by a man who never learned how to say them aloud. So here's the question. Is there someone in your life whose love you may have been misreading? Or, harder still, is there someone who might be misreading yours? Don't wait for a ledger. Don't wait for a funeral. Don't wait for 30 years. Say it while there's still time. And if stories like this remind you of the people who shaped your life, subscribe to Stories You Lived, because some stories aren't about strangers, they're about us.